sometimes we kind of think of ourselves as sort of by myself here, and we don't realize how much context, environment, all of those things are interconnected with us into who we are, into how we live. So when we're displaced, either like physically displaced in a new place or our role is changing, we kind of almost expect ourselves to adapt right away, right? And we don't kind of make space for, there is going to be a lot of emotions that might come up, right? When there are things that are changing, inevitably there will be grief. Sure, there'll be varying amounts of grief, right?
Yes.
Some people will experience more grief than others, and in different seasons will experience different kinds of grief. But the point is that grief is going to be there with any kind of change because something new is happening, which means something old is being taken away.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Meta Transitions. We are so happy to be here with registered clinical counselor Nina. Welcome to our channel, Nina. We're so happy to have you. Yeah, so let's get into it, Nina. What is your story?
So I am a registered clinical counselor. I'm a therapist just like yourself. I was born in Kazakhstan, former Soviet Union, and then moved to Toronto with my family as a little girl, moved all the way to Vancouver for grad school, and here I am. I do counseling with adults, I do it with kids, teenagers, and yeah, that's my jam.
Lovely to have you, definitely. And you said that you moved around a bit. So you said Kazakhstan. Tell me about that. How was that?
Right. So I guess even before that, there were quite a few transitions within like the generations of my family. So I'm background wise, I'm Korean, and then my I guess great grandparents moved to Russia and the Soviet Union, and then at that point they were forcibly moved. The Koreans in Russia were moved to Kazakhstan, so forced migration.
Got it.
And then that's kind of how I ended up in Kazakhstan and how my family was in Kazakhstan. So we have like quite a bit of family and a few generations of family in Kazakhstan, and then we moved around. So yes.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. A little bit of displacement there, of your family, and I'm sure that has a bit, of the history of how your family had to move, as you said, forcibly from one place to the next. Okay, all right.
So lots of transitions there.
Definitely. All right, so tell us a bit more about being a counselor and what you do.
So I work, I do two things. I'm contracted with the city of Langley, and I do family therapy there.
Yes.
So that takes up about half my time. And then the other half of my time, I do private practice. So I mostly work in private practice with individuals, adults, some teenagers, no kids. I do only online therapy, working with perfectionism, working with boundaries, working with people pleasing, helping people get clarity on their life, just to be able to make decisions, things like that. Lots of anxiety as well.
I can imagine, right? And as you know, most of the people who watch our programming, they're coming because they've had some sort of transition happening in their life, right? And we're here wanting to normalize that transition's the normal part of, being a human being. And we all go through transitions, right? So what do you see sort of in your practice when it comes to transitioning? Because you just mentioned a few sort of tools and things that people need to work on even while they're transitioning.
Right. Well, I think I love that you say normalizing the transitions. And I think what I really value is normalizing the emotions around transitions, right? Because sometimes we kind of think of ourselves as sort of by myself here, and we don't realize how much context, environment, all of those things are interconnected with us into who we are, into how we live. So when we're displaced, either like physically displaced in a new place or a new workplace, or our role is changing, we kind of almost expect ourselves to adapt right away, right? And we don't kind of make space for, there is going to be a lot of emotions that might come up, right? So the kind of transitions I would see are things like big moves, people moving from one province to another and kind of dealing with the impact of that and missing their friends and family back home. Also transitions of trying to think about if they would like to have more kids, if they want to have any kids, trying to get clarity around those things. Could be relational, physical change, anything like that, really.
Yeah, definitely. No, I hear that. And, just you sort of speaking about those everyday normal life transitions and how, sometimes these things can impact us on a deeper level, right? Emotionally.
Exactly.
And, counseling is sort of there to help an individual to transition well.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And I think another thing is that we never think of grief and transitions as going together, but really they do. We think of grief as only death, right? So it's like, I only have permission to grieve if there has been a death. But in reality, grief is way, way broader than that. It's not this one small category. So when there are things that are changing, inevitably there will be grief. Sure, there'll be varying amounts of grief, right? Some people will experience more grief than others, and in different seasons we'll experience different kinds of grief. But the point is that grief is going to be there with any kind of change because something new is happening, which means something old is being taken away.
Yes, definitely. So going from that idea of having something to losing something and recognizing that grief is much more than just sort of the death of a person.
Exactly.
But it could also be sort of maybe losing the friends that you once had.
Absolutely.
Or, losing maybe even your sense of self and then needing to find this change in placement or perspective.
Right.
Could be a transition too.
Yeah. And, when I think about it, even, I love that you do that because sometimes we don't have realistic expectations, right? Or we're not prepared for the kinds of emotions that come up for us when we are going through a big change or a transition. So even thinking back to when I moved from Toronto to Vancouver, same country, we speak the same language. So you'd think like that's not a difficult move. How is it too different from moving down the street? And I just wasn't prepared for how much of a transition it was. And I even felt like this sense of culture shock because the East Coast culture is very different from West Coast culture.
Definitely.
Just like a difference in my family not being there and like it's completely different, right? Even though in my mind I thought, oh, that's such an easy transition.
No, for sure. Like, there's that expectation, as you said earlier, that, it shouldn't be too bad, right? I'm just moving provinces and still in the same country. And then, you're shocked by the difference from one city to the next, right? And recognizing that, what, I don't have the support system I had before. And even that can be, a shift and a change. What do you see in your sort of clients when it comes to sort of that idea of community and, even with COVID happening right now, and the isolation?
Yes. If there was one thing I could say is like sort of a common thread I see with a lot of people is this thread of loneliness. I mean, I'm sure you see this as well. It's just, it's not so much dependent on having people around. It's like not feeling connected or not having a whole lot of people you can have really open conversations with and feel like emotionally safe with. So definitely that is a big theme that comes up over and over is lack of support, loneliness, and a longing for community, but also feeling quite stuck and isolated at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm seeing a similar thread, right? People are saying, I've recognized that some of even the company that I've had over the last little while, I was sort of in company with them just to be with another person. Exactly. And then sort of, COVID created this opportunity for them to reevaluate those relationships, right? And it got them to a place where they were like, you know what, that person's actually not good for me, or toxic or whatever. And then they're recognizing, like you said, the more important pieces to the, interpersonal relationship, which is the sense of belonging and feeling safe and wanting to make sure that those connections are positive.
Yeah, and I think COVID really just like amplified all of that, because people now have to be so intentional about creating connection and having community in a totally different way that we've really never had to do before.
Yep.
Right? And I think it kind of exacerbates the situation, or maybe enlightens it, in the sense that whereas before we might have contacts with people kind of like almost like by happenstance, right? I'm going to the gym, I just chat with people, going to restaurants and that kind of thing. Whereas now that's not happening the same way anymore. And if there isn't intention about, reaching out and making connection, then it's like it shows even more glaringly, obviously, oh man, this is really hard, and how disconnected we are, really.
Yeah, definitely. So it's making it more aware of sort of that deep sense of longing and need for others, but then creating that space for intentionality.
Exactly.
To connect with the right people and the people who you want to create that safe space with. Love that so much. All right. So, could we then sort of talk about the second aspect, right? Which is sort of transitional points or things that you can identify maybe in your life that brought about change for you, whether that's professionally or personally.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely, I think one of the biggest ones was for me to move from Toronto to Vancouver. And that was there was a few layers of it, right? It was moving on my own, right? So kind of leaving behind family and friends and going to this place where I didn't know anybody. And then there was also, it was just me entering into grad school. So this was my first time leaving home as well. So there was like that transition as well. So that was a big one for sure. Another one would be finishing school, being a student, essentially, and going off into the work world, which for me ended up being going into business and starting my business. Yeah, so those are definitely two, at least at the forefront of my mind, two big transition points.
And how would you say those impacted you, those changes? And, how did it, I guess, create space maybe for you?
Yeah, I think we all kind of have a different relationship with change. We have our own kind of way that we respond to it. I think for me, it can get really overwhelming quickly, change. Especially as like a person who really has worked through perfectionism a lot, it can be hard to at times think like, am I doing what I need to be doing? Is this where I want to be in my life? So I would say it's definitely been hard, and definitely each one has its own challenges because it's new. And new for me has felt very uncomfortable.
I can imagine, and it's also that space of recognizing change can be uncomfortable, and it probably will be uncomfortable. And there will be some challenging, spots in there, and recognizing, those things. So how did you work through the challenge to get to maybe where you are now?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things, right? Having support, having support from people around you, people like in your community where you find yourself, like looking for a community, and also just community back home, friends, family, that kind of thing. So definitely leaning on that. I think the other thing is kind of embracing that change is uncomfortable and not trying to run away from the discomfort. Sometimes when uncomfortable emotions come up, we just want to run away from it. Like, I just don't want any change to happen so that I can stay in my safe bubble. But the more we can kind of embrace our capacity to sit with uncomfortable feelings, the easier it gets, really. So definitely just like, yes, this is uncomfortable and that's okay. Like, this is what I'm choosing to do for my life. This is what fits within my values. And it's uncomfortable because it's new. That's okay. Both can be there. So I think those two things are definitely the most helpful for me.
No, thank you for sharing that. I'm seeing such a really beautiful theme there. The idea of, sometimes it takes stepping out on your own and, outside of sort of that comfort zone to reach to where you want to reach to, or to achieve your goals. And with sort of that stepping out, comes the risk of loneliness and this possibility of not having sort of that social, system around you. And then it sounds like creating community, right? So figuring out ways that you can then, create community around you that's going to provide the support that maybe you've lost, right? Yeah. And then embracing that sense of discomfort while going through that transition.
Yeah, and knowing that the discomfort's not going to last forever. At some point, we're so adaptive as human beings, as uncomfortable as it is for us. We have this uncanny ability just to adapt to the circumstances we're placed under.
Yes.
So even knowing that the discomfort doesn't have to last forever. And if it is, then it may be time to look at, what's happening inside? Like, is this aligning with my values? Is there something more? But yeah, it's like, it won't last forever, really, which is hopeful, right?
Definitely hopeful. And, you're talking about sort of aligning with values and beliefs, almost, the setting boundaries that you talked about earlier.
Yes.
Right. And recognizing that, it's really important to listen to those things and that help it. And that will help you to guide, I guess, your decisions.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Nina. I really appreciate you sharing your insight with us, your personal stories, and your professional story with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Tricia.
No problem. All right. So the last thing that we generally ask is, for you to share your contact information. So, I guess individuals out there who would like to, see you, they can reach out.
Yeah, so you can find me at www.havencounseling.ca. I only work with Canadian clients at the moment, and I'm working with quite a limited number of people. But if not, I also have an Instagram. It's at wholehearted.growth. So WHOLE, wholehearted.growth.
Wonderful. I will be putting Nina's contact information in the description below. So check there if you want to connect with Nina. Thank you so much for being here, Nina. We really appreciate you sharing.
Thanks.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. Until next time, take care.